Okay, guys, so let's talk about the types of observational studies. The types of observational studies, we are going to talk about three types: cross-sectional study, retrospective study, and prospective study. So the cross-sectional study is when the information is collected now. Um, so, for example, we're investigating potential risk factors for obesity, and a study went to a number of randomly selected middle schools in California and collected data on BMI, methods of getting to school, whether or not students ate lunch in the cafeteria, participation in after-school programs, and hours of exercise per week, as well as socioeconomic information. So this is about now, what's going on with our study subjects now. That's a cross-sectional study. So the retrospective study is when we go back in time. We collect information about what happened in the past, and hopefully connecting it to how it's affecting us now. So, for example, um, socioeconomic student talks, selects some high-paid jobs and individuals that getting high-paid job, and ask them if they had a wisdom to take statistics class when they went to school. So that would be an example of retrospective. And the prospective study is when we're starting to observe subjects and their habits now, and then we're going to see how those habits will affect them down the road. Okay, so there are some pros and cons for prospective and retrospective study. So for example, for retrospective study, basically there is a recall bias because sometimes it's just hard to recall what exactly did you do, and a lot of times how we feel about things affect what we remember. So if you had a class, like for example, if I ask you, well, if you passed that anatomy and physiology class that's considered so hard by students, well, you may, if you passed it, if it was an interesting class for you and you were like, woo-hoo, you may think that you didn't study as much as you actually studied because it was so much fun. But then for someone who struggled in the class and they didn't pass the class, they will say, oh, I studied a lot, it was too much, it was so hard, and then also people actually tend to blame somebody else if they fail at something. So if the student passed the class, it's usually, okay, yes, I had a good teacher, but I also was awesome, I worked hard, and I passed. And if they didn't, then usually they blame, they put a blame somewhere else. It's just natural inclination of our psyche. Okay, so another okay, so for the prospective study, the cons would be it's very hard to study some rare and long-term effects. So, for example, if you want to see study which life habits influence people chance of contracting, let's say, a colon cancer, right? So you would start observing people and their eating habits, and then down the road, 30 years later, some of them, very small group, where very small amount of people will contract the disease, and so that's not very effective. Another example would be also seeing how many students graduate after studying in school for 6 years. So again, you have to follow these students for 6 years in order to get your study results. That's a long time. So on a test, I may ask you what kind of experiment is most appropriate for a certain situation, and you would have to choose which one. Or I may describe a situation and ask you what kind of study that is. That's another option for the test. So right now, I'm gonna attach a quiz, and I don't have it ready yet, but I will.